A large portion of this video was sourced from indiewatch.net. Specifically, the 4-part article titled, "I Want to Make a Fighting Game" by Andrea Jens Demetrio. As well as a comment on the first part by Puncher's Chance. If you want to see what Andrea is up to recently, I also happened upon their post on supercombo.gg. So, what is needed to make a fighting game? Even if we're limiting it to just the essentials, there are still some options as far as genre. First, we have games where the characters and settings are made in 3D, where a character is seen from behind as they can move up, down, left or right, forward and backward, all in 3D space. Then there's 2D, where everything is flat images, typically seen from the side, where a character can move left or right, or up or down, with no side-to-side motion. Finally, we have games where a character is made with 3D models, and yet we're still looking at them from a side perspective, where even though the 3 dimensions exist, only 2 of them are open, which can be called 3D but 2D, or sometimes just 2.5D. The next thing to consider is the user interface, otherwise known as the UI, where you'll usually find different modes like story, a series of fights against predetermined characters, a training mode where you can test out different abilities in a stress-free environment, typically with more information being shown to the player, and then a more standard fight mode where you fight other real players, whether it's in person or online. And there's even differences for how to handle online, like peer-to-peer, or it can be run through a dedicated server where the information goes back and forth in order to secure a more stable connection. Getting further into it, we have the underlying systems that define those experiences. Most essential is the idea of hitboxes. In order for the characters to interact with each other, like when they're throwing a punch, there need to be invisible shapes that, once they overlap, the computer will know that it needs to register a hit. The first of those shapes are hitboxes. These only appear when there's an action that will result in damage. Meanwhile, on the flip side, you have hurtboxes. Generally, these both need to align with the anatomy of the character so that they match the player's expectations. Additionally, there's a more optional variation with a collision box where their main goal is to not overlap, and thus keep the characters from occupying the same space. And how do the characters feel to move? When they're moving horizontally, are they fast? Are they able to quickly close the gap? Or are they more slow and methodical, needing to more carefully plan their next move? Or how about moving vertically? Do they float and linger in the air? Or are they even barely able to get off the ground, needing to more carefully plan their next move? And then there are the different states a character can be in that will affect various properties of said character, similar to the states of matter like solid, liquid, and gas. The goal is to combine these different states into something called a state machine, which is defined as a device which can move between a finite number of different configurations in a controlled way. State machines are useful because they reduce what the system has to check for at any given moment. So, for example, you could be standing up, jumping up in the air, or laying flat on the ground. And each one of these would be in their own bubble as their own state. So to go from standing to in the air, you have to jump. And to go back to standing, you'd have to land. Similarly, you'd have to lay down or stand up to go from lying to standing, or vice versa. But then for the final two states, you can only go from jumping to laying by falling flat. But notably, you can't go straight from laying down to jumping. You'd have to stand up first, before you can jump. There can also be actions that loop back that are needed to maintain the state, like how you have to actively keep standing up to stay standing, or even when you're lying down, you have to continue to do nothing. And again, there's an exception where some states are temporary and there's nothing you can do to continue that state. So the final result might look like this, where one is the default state as it's connected to different continuous or temporary states. So it's important for the player to know which actions will lead to the winning state. And so we have systems for win conditions. The first way is a system of health or hit points, like having more health points, or where once one player runs out, the other wins. Then there are objectives like hit them with this move, perform this many actions, or don't get pushed out of bounds. And then there's time that can pressure a player into achieving a certain outcome in a preset limit, like meeting an objective where a player might have to continuously perform an action to get a high score, perform this amount of actions in that amount of time, or just having more health before time runs out. Then, there are the specific mechanics that can really help players distinguish one game from another. So here are just a few examples, as I understand them currently, at least. First off are things like combos, where you press a button and get a certain move, and then if you press that same button again quickly enough, then you'll get a different move, even though you press the same button. But because combos can potentially lock you into a certain set of actions, a lot of games will also have it where you can cancel by pressing another button right in the middle, so you can react and get out of the way. Because another character might take advantage with a combo of their own, or they might have a specific counter that they can do if they time it right. Alternatively, you might try to block an oncoming attack instead, in order to reduce the damage you take until you have an opening again. But the other player might take advantage of this and grab you instead. And if you get grabbed, you're likely to get thrown as well, making it harder to recover. And typically, your opponent will have options of which way to throw you. So perhaps it's better to just not be in the way in the first place. And that's where you have things like a backdash, where you try to put distance between you two by moving backwards quickly. There's also a much less common maneuver where a character will dodge by receding further into the background, as if it's a 3D space. There are even times where you can dash while still in the air, as if you're leaping off some invisible ground. Some extra mechanics that might be in play for controlling your opponent's movement are things like juggling, where you keep an opponent in the air with consecutive attacks before they have a chance to land and recover. And then we have long-range attacks, like projectile fireballs or slicing wind, to more realistic things like arrows or weapons attached to chains. One of the most common elements for fighting games to include, typically below the bar that shows your health points, are segmented bars that, once each segment is filled, will allow the player to do more visually impressive and more damaging super moves. So a regular move with one segment of the super meter might add on extra visual flair. So moves that use more segments of the meter have more visual flair and do more damage, maybe even instantly killing if it lands. Another condition might be that a character is low on health when they use it, which are typically called desperation moves. And finally, if it's your opponent that's low on health, when hit with a move that will finish them off, the character will do a finishing move as a final flare to end the round. And then we have some more optional mechanics, like a character having a transformation, where the way that they play changes just as much as their physical appearance does, typically for the better. But it could also be a character that starts out stronger, and their weapon or armor breaks, making them more vulnerable, but maybe improving in other areas, like speed. And in a similar way, there might even be stages that can change, where the walls could crack or even break wide open. And then we have the art style, which is probably the most specific appeal that even people who don't try to play fighting games can appreciate. So for the visuals, for pixel art, I plan to use an online editor called Piskel, or Piskel app. Or if I really needed to, I can just zoom in and use Krita, like I have been for these videos. And as far as sound effects and music, well, I'm not sure yet. So then we have the triangle of design, where you can try to do something quick, something good, or something cheap. If you want it to be quick and good, it's not going to be cheap. And so no matter which way you're going, you're always sacrificing something else. Now luckily, I'm not too worried about doing it quick. And I'm also trying my best to spend as little money as possible. Unfortunately, I've replaced the money issue with variety, which might mean eventually I'll have to outsource and have to spend money. So if I'm able to make a good variety of characters, that's still not quite the end. I'll still have to go back through and make sure that everything is at least decently balanced, as well as polishing it up and getting rid of any extra bugs. And so, that was the extent of my research for now. So next time, I'll be diving into Unity and give my first attempt at making something.